Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the latest episode of If Data Could Talk. I'm your host, Andy Cotgreave, technical evangelist from Tableau. Here we are. This is episode 15. Check it out. My hair has got 15 weeks of lockdown growth on it. So what do you think? Should I cut it or grow it? You let me know in the comments. Anyway, we're not here to talk about hair. We're here to talk about data. I'm joined today by my colleague, Eilidh Anzalotti. Eilidh, thanks for joining us as a co-host. How are you doing today? Should I cut my hair?
I mean, Andy, I think it looks excellent. I'm loving the quarantine length, and I'm really happy to be here and chat to our guest.
Yeah, that's great. So who is our guest? It's none other than Harry Stevens. He's graphics editor at The Washington Post. He's also the man behind the most visited page ever on The Washington Post. You may remember way back in February, as we were grappling with terms such as social distancing and exponential curves and logarithmic scales, we also were trying to flatten the curve. And Harry came up with the simulitis, a fictional disease that he used to play out various situations as you scrolled through the story and the webpage. Hugely influential piece of work. And I think it's fair to say it really nudged how people responded to the pandemic as it was developing. So we wanted to bring Harry on to talk about the sort of the genesis of that piece, the idea and the design ideas behind it, why it succeeded, the impact it had, and now we're several months further down the line to reflect a little bit on, well, what does data mean to an audience now, and how have needs changed over time? So hopefully that sounds like an exciting episode. I think it does. So we're going to dive straight into it. Harry, welcome to the show. Why don't you start off by reminding us a little bit about what the article was about and why you felt the need to write it and how it got to the published moment.
Sure. So thanks for having me. I also second Eilidh's opinion on the hair. I think you should just let it ride. Go all the way.
I'll do that.
Cut it when we get a vaccine. So the article was called why epidemics or why diseases spread exponentially and how to flatten the curve. And so it, first of all, tried to explain the exponential growth of diseases or anything as it spreads through a network, which I think at the beginning of the disease and even now continues to be a somewhat difficult concept for people to wrap their minds around. The fact that if you give the disease to somebody else, it's not like they then give the disease to one other person and then one other person and then one other person and so on and so forth, that in a network things spread exponentially. So first you have it, and then maybe two people have it, and then 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, and so on and so forth until many, many, many more people have it than the first person. And then you can affect people on the other side of a network who you never have any contact with. And so this was something that I didn't have an intuitive grasp of, and I don't think that most other people did. And so I was trying to figure out ways to explain that exponential growth to people. And so the article, for those who haven't seen it, it features a series of very, very crude simulations of circles bouncing around in a rectangle. So the dynamics of this simulation are that circles, when they collide either with the walls of that rectangle or with each other, they just bounce. And of course, this is not anything like real human relationships, right? First of all, you don't live in a rectangle where when you reach the edge, you immediately turn around and, the angle, like the reflection angle, and you don't, when you meet your friends, just, immediately move the other direction. So it wasn't in any way trying to represent the dynamics of real life. Moreover, the disease, so there's a disease in the simulations, and the disease is just coloring the circles. So if a circle is red, it has this disease, which I called simulitis. And if a red circle bounces into a green circle or a healthy circle, that healthy circle then becomes sick. or red. And then that circle goes off and keeps doing what it's doing, and it bounces off into other healthy circles, and those circles become sick, and so on and so forth. And very, very quickly, all of the circles are sick. And it ends up illustrating or making concrete this mental model of a disease spreading through a network. It illustrates it very well. In fact, it illustrates it better than other simulations I've seen that try to more accurately reflect the way that people actually relate to each other. So I've seen like these simulations, examples of simulations where the circles just kind of intermingle, like more like humans do, and then like maybe move off. And it's harder to watch. It's not as interesting to watch because when the circles collide and bounce away, you have a visual cue that an interaction has happened. So the ways in which the simulation are not real end up helping people to understand the reality of disease spread better. So in the first simulation, you just have 200 circles moving around in a rectangle, and very, very quickly, everybody gets sick. And then eventually they recover and they become immune. That's another way that simulitis is not like COVID-19. Nobody dies of simulitis. And also, like, the amount of time the disease lasts in each person is the same with simulitis, and that's not true with COVID-19. Once you have recovered, you're recovered and can no longer be contagious, which is something that is not confirmed about COVID-19. So in other words, simulitis simplified COVID-19 in several ways, but in those simplifications, it made the idea of a disease spreading through a network simpler to understand. So anyway, as you go through the article, then I introduce different parameters into the environment in which the balls are moving, or in the way that the balls move. And those can very crudely simulate things that we see in reality. So in one of the later simulations, I had like a quarantine, which was just like putting a wall in the middle of the rectangle. And then so instead of the balls being able to interact with ones on the other side of the wall, they just bounce off of it. They can't infect each other anymore. But then, of course, like halfway through the simulation, that quarantine wall kind of breaks and opens up, and the balls can infect each other. And that was just trying to illustrate this idea that it's very, very difficult to enforce these kinds of forced quarantines where you actually, like the state or the government, like forcibly prevents people from moving around.
And that's almost kind of something we're seeing in sort of what's happening now, right? Is that the people are struggling to keep up with the quarantine, aren't they? Well, I really liked how, along with the simulations, you are building a curve of growth and decline of the disease at the top of each of these animations. And I think for me, it was the abstraction of the disease made a very complex topic understandable. There was some sort of engagement with the dots, but then it was at a time we didn't know what this curve meant. You know, that was a completely abstract concept there, and you were using simulitis to build that whole thing. So, you know, for me, that was a huge part of the success. And I believe some of the genesis of this came from you're almost a coding accident. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. I had like 2 years ago, I had been just playing around with collision detection in my browser just to get that, you know, circles bouncing off of each other dynamic going on, because it was fun to try to code it and it was fun to watch. And I think that ended up sort of being a key to the success of the thing, was like, it's fun to watch those simulations or those balls bounce around, even if there's no disease at all, or even if you're not trying to teach a lesson. It's just sort of mesmerizing to watch those circles bounce off of each other. And so that was kind of a inviting window into the story. It was like, you just want to watch those circles move around. And before, you know, that's the sort of sweet candy with the vegetables, you know.
Yeah, it reminded me, there's a thing called the Hyder-Simul illusion, which was from 50, 60 years ago, where somebody just took two circles and a couple of triangles and animated those and created this deep story of a triangle being a bully and then the circles, you know, fighting back. It's a remarkable thing, and I think I saw some of that in in this piece as well. And now this thing took off, right? This thing became huge. It's been translated into how many languages?
So I think 15 languages.
15. That's amazing. And I think I wanted to talk a little. There are loads of other great little flourishes in here, or efficient design storytelling. So for people who haven't seen it, in the text you've got the color coding the color is encoded in the text of the article, and some of the curve descriptions where you've got exponential curve, you actually show a curve. And I think they're just, how do those come about, and what do you think they add to a piece like this?
So the inline graphics are a crucial part of the explanation. The color encoding, so there's like 3 colors that you got to keep track of, which I think is probably about the maximum amount of colors that people can easily keep track of. But there's sick people, there's healthy people, and there's recovered people, and each one is a different color. And so rather than having like a legend next to each of the charts, you just label them right in the text, like, the recovered is this color, and I put a little dot next to it. My former editor, Lazaro Gamio, used to call that a key for free. So it's just like, I
love that.
Rather than having a key next to the chart, you get a key, like you can get a key in the text itself, or you can get a key by direct labeling elements in the chart. So that, that's a key for free. And then the little line the only real data in the story is at the very top. There's a chart that shows the number of cases per day cumulative in the United States up until that point, which was on March 14th. So there were only like 2,000 or something reported cases at the time. And obviously, there's orders of magnitude more than that now. Yeah. Then later on in the text, it says that represents an exponential growth. And so I repeated the shape of that growth curve in the text itself. And that's what Edward Tufte calls a spark line. It's a data word. And it was able to emphasize this idea of exponential growth, which is really all that I was trying to explain to people, was that, exponential growth curves look like whoop rather than just a straight line.
Yeah. And what we at that time, people weren't familiar with it. So people like you and data journalists around the world were trying to work out how to convey that novel concept to a huge amount of people. Now, did you know it was a good piece of work? Tell me, I'm interested somewhere in the creation process, right? It's a hugely popular page. You must have had an inkling and been pretty amazed as it went viral.
Yeah, I thought it was good. I did think it was good when I was publishing it. In fact, I told my wife, I think this is the best thing I've ever made, right like the day before we published it. But that being said, I had no inclination of how popular it would be. I thought some people would read it. I mean, that's one of the nice things about working at a place like the Washington Post, is you have a pretty big audience for the things that you make by default, because it's a well-read website. But I had no idea how popular it was going to end up being. I think, looking back on it, part of it was just luck. Part of it was that it was published right at the right time in terms of at least where the United States was culturally. Yeah. I think a few days before the graphic was published, I saw an interview with a kid on spring break in Florida who was saying, despite the concerns about coronavirus spreading, that he was just going to get drunk and party and enjoy his spring break no matter what, as if that was some kind of brave position. Like, I'm not afraid of getting a virus. I'm just going to have fun.
Yeah.
What he was failing to understand, and I think a lot of other people were failing to understand, was that it's not about you getting sick. It's about killing my grandfather. It's about the disease spreading from you to someone else, to someone else, to someone else who's more vulnerable to it. Yeah. And that your individual actions can have effects on people who you never interact with personally. And so later on in the article, after the sort of free-for-all simulation where everybody gets sick really fast, and then the failed quarantine, there are 2 other scenarios that try to crudely represent this concept of social distancing, which at the time, like now you hear social distancing, it's like a word you've known all your life or a phrase you've known all your life. But back in March, it was new. It was kind of a new phrase. Like, what is this social distancing? And so those simulations were trying to show what happens if some of the circles or some of the agents in the network just stop moving around. And what it shows very vividly is that when people stop moving, the ability of the disease to spread through the network is severely hindered. Like it just doesn't spread nearly as fast anymore. And that was really important at the time because what the concern was, and continues to be a concern actually in some states, is that the hospitals were just going to be overwhelmed because there were going to be too many sick people at any one time. So even if in these simulations and maybe even in reality, the same total number of people end up getting sick in the end, it would, if you space out those sicknesses or those infections, then the hospitals are able to deal with a lower number of total people at any given time. Whereas if all the people get sick right away, the hospitals are going to be overwhelmed, and then their ability to treat people will be compromised and more people will die. So it was just showing that, like, if you can slow down the spread of the disease by not moving around, that fewer people will be sick at any given time. And so, that will buy people time and hopefully fewer people will die.
Absolutely. And now as we think about how that's setting in a more contemporary setting today, this is something we're going to talk about for the next few minutes too. So Eileen, do you have any questions to add?
Yeah, Harry, something that I've been wondering about, this came out in March, and obviously the virus has just continued to spread in the US. I'm wondering, how are people engaging with the idea of flattening the curve and social distancing now? They really empathized with your article, but what's the attitude like now?
It varies from person to person. And in some places, I mean, just based on what I've read in the news and people I've talked to, in places like New York City, where they were hit really bad with the virus, and people are still taking it very seriously. In other places where the first wave didn't hit them very badly, they rushed to reopen, and very predictably there were a lot of new infections, new cases, and now they're scrambling to lock everything down again. And that hasn't happened in a lot of other countries. But in the United States, we just haven't gotten it under control. In our country, in terms of the policy, there's been this framing of the economy and healthcare for people's health as these sort of two diametrically opposed goals. Like, if we lock things down to keep people healthy, therefore the economy will suffer. And if we open up the economy, then more people will get sick, and we have to strike the right balance. But I think what other countries have shown is that that's a false choice, that you can't get the economy moving again until you get the virus under control. And it's a lesson that was learned in a lot of other places, but appears to have not been internalized in the US. So, I mean, it just goes to show that as popular as the article was and as many people as read it, there are much more powerful forces out there than a single article. And certainly political leadership plays a much larger role in how people choose to behave.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that makes total sense. I'm just wondering, what do you think we need then to get people to change their behavior and pay attention again to the importance of flattening the curve and social distancing and all these measures we can implement?
I'm not a public health expert, so there's only so much water that my recommendations hold. But I would say fear. People need to be afraid of the virus.
Yeah, and it's like the importance of storytelling, right? Like storytelling around the consequences and the data.
Yeah, I mean, so I think that design and journalism has its limits. People can be convinced of all kinds of narratives depending upon who they trust and who they listen to. If my article back in March did have some influence on people's behavior and convinced them of the need to reduce their social interaction for a while, and therefore, save people's lives or preventing people from getting sick, then that is, just an incredible thing to think about, and that would be extremely gratifying. But, time has gone on, and people have received a lot of different messages about how dangerous the virus is, and what sort of behavior constitutes safe behavior and what behavior constitutes dangerous behavior. And unfortunately, a lot of people have wanted to go back out. I mean, the bars were open in Texas, and people went to them, and then a lot of people got sick.
Do you think there's been too much data? Do you think there can be too much data?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, most people don't. Most people aren't convinced about things because of data. We've talked to each other before, and we were talking about Daniel Kahneman, the famous Nobel laureate psychologist, who studied very deeply the way that people make decisions under uncertainty and the sort of systematic mistakes that people make in their thinking, that people are irrational. And one thing that he said that has always stuck with me is that nobody ever made a decision because of a number. They need a story. And so, as useful as dashboards and data visualizations are to certain people, like I look at data visualizations all the time, and I, for some reason, seem to be drawn to them and find them very compelling. I feel that most people need some narrative to go with it. And I think that's why a lot of data visualization practitioners also end up wanting to learn about storytelling. And ways that you can explain through a narrative what the data is showing. And I also think that is one of the keys to the success of this Simulitis story, is that as you watch the simulations play out, and Andy, you mentioned this with those sort of triangle circle simulations, is that for some reason human beings have this tendency to ascribe agency to very clearly non-human actors. So it could just be a circle bouncing around in a rectangle or a triangle or whatever, and you know in your mind that it's not a person, and yet you empathize with it. So I got messages from people who were watching these simulations, and they would say, I watched one ball get sick, and I kept watching it, waiting for it to recover, and when it recovered, I felt a sense of relief.
Yeah.
And so having that human connection to it, I think, was one of the keys to its success.
That's right. There's something so compelling about animation as well. I mean, bar chart races, right? They became such a huge thing. People, you could just animate lines, and just the point at which a line crosses another line in an animation creates this moment of drama, if you want to exploit it for that. It's obviously a really good communication style that journalists like you and across many parts of the media are really exploiting to great effect, particularly in 2020 with COVID, but generally. So brilliant. I think we will stop this section right here. I hope everyone's enjoyed hearing about more about what happened with Harry's Simulitis piece. Go and check it out. There are links below. This second section, this is what we're reading. Each time we ask our guests and our hosts what have they been looking at, reading, listening to that is somehow related to data or technology that you should be listening to. So Harry, graphics editor at Washington Post, what's on your mind? So
lately, the book that I've been listening to on tape is The Making of the Atomic Bomb by Richard Rhodes, which came out in 1986. It's this book that it's like 800 pages long.
Wow.
And physical copy of it had sat in my grandfather's bathroom for as long as I've been alive, I think. I don't think anybody ever opened it. It was just always sat there. And I saw it many times and was always wondering, what is this tome? And I got a lot of extra time now because of the quarantine. And so whenever I exercise, I like to listen to something, because I find exercising by itself just to be really boring. So my exercise companion for the last month or so has been The Making of the Atomic Bomb.
Wow.
And it's just incredible. The writer, he just knows about everything. His insight into human nature is incredibly interesting and compelling. Like, what types of people end up being great scientists? You know, like, what sort of mind do you have to be able to imagine a reality entirely different from the reality that you've been told about, and then the sort of diligence and persistence you have to be able to discover it through experimentation and study and hard thinking. And so it goes through this sort of very, very fertile period of scientific exploration in the late 19th and early 20th century, and how we learned about how atoms work and sort of nuclear physics and chemistry in the run up to the atomic bomb. And so it introduces you to all these sort of incredibly interesting scientific luminaries around that period. So
it's got politics, science, history, psychology, philosophy, I guess. It's got the whole thing.
And then the interaction between science and the military. Like, prior to World War I, a lot of Western governments weren't really interested in what scientists were up to. And then suddenly they were able to, some of these nuclear physicists and chemists were creating gases that could be used to kill, thousands and thousands of people on the Western Front. And suddenly the government was like, yeah, we want to know what you guys can do.
Gosh.
Which is, just horrible and sad. And there's stories about a lot of these scientists who felt this pull between patriotism, that they had to help their government win the war, and also their sort of core humanity, which instructed them to not help create these weapons of destruction, or some felt it was a perversion of science, that they were using their learning to create these weapons of war. And so those sorts of internal fights and grappling are also addressed. And it's just really fast. I mean, you learn about people like Niels Bohr and Marie Curie and Robert Oppenheimer and all these incredibly brilliant and interesting people. So it's just been a lot of fun to listen to. I mean, if you're in a rush, it's not the book for you, but if you got a lot of time, which we all have right now.
I think people have more time. How many hours have you got left to go?
I don't even know. I'm only like a quarter of the way through.
All right. Well, let us know when you finish it. It sounds great. I went down a rabbit hole as you shared the notes for this episode. I was like, it's been a long time since I've read a big fat book. Maybe this could be the one. So that sounds good. Thanks for that. Eilidh, you've got something great to share too. What should people read?
Yeah, so over the weekend, I, like a lot of people, really, really got excited about Farhad Manjoo's article in the New York Times, I've Seen a Future Without Cars, and it's amazing. Personally, for me, big fan of car-free cities, alternative transit, that whole idea. I've been personally interested in that for a long time, but this article really did something different, in my opinion. I think if you are interested in that topic, you've probably seen a lot of things that describe the benefits of a car-free city, talk about it in terms of the data, decline of pollution, ease of transit, just like more space and everything like that. But this article actually shows it, and it kind of made me think, like, that's what's going on in Harry's work too. It's like, you can talk about the need for social distancing and describe how it limits contacts, limit the spread of disease, but it's totally different if you can see it. And in this article, it actually like brings you in and like places you in the streetscape and like allows you to actually experience what it would be like if there weren't cars. So I highly recommend just like reading through. It's well written and amazing, but it's like really the visuals like that are scattered throughout and kind of emerge as you scroll through that just like really drive it home.
Go ahead, Harry. Sorry.
I was just going to agree that the graphics in that story were really excellent. Yeah. It's so well referenced. The links, there's so many deep links to go into. You can lose a morning in that. I didn't realize Park Avenue was originally a park, and that vintage photograph of Park Avenue is like, what did you give up, New York? What did you give up? And then as a European, I've got access to go to the Netherlands, go to Belgium, Scandinavia, the Nordics. It's like, you know what? A lot of cities have already done that in Europe. So I've seen, hopefully, your future, and hopefully we can get from graphics to a reality. It'll be a big, bold step, but great if you can do it. All right. What I'm going to reveal, what I've been fascinated by recently, is something being done by some school teachers in the US. And it's about what happens when you reveal charts in a slightly novel way.
right? What we do as storytellers, sometimes we just show a whole chart and you just get all the information in one go. Generally, as storytellers, the approach I've always had is, show an axis, show another axis, explain what one mark reveals, then add some color, and then show the final picture. Whereas in this article, what graphs reveal if you give them time is they show the marks first. So imagine a situation where you've got a bunch of bars, a bar chart, and there's one really long bar, and you say to your audience, and there's no labels. There's no labels on the x-axis, the y-axis. There's no title. It's just like, what do these marks tell you? Oh yeah, there's one big thing. Then you add one piece at a time, add one number. Now what's this telling you about the data? And the example on the site is it eventually, after you have a conversation about each revelation, you finally realize it's expenditure on schools and community and libraries and all sorts of things. And there's one big bar, and that's spending on the NYPD, right? So it's actually expenditure in New York. But what I love about this slow reveal approach is that it turns on its head the way I've thought about data storytelling. It's like, I'm going to show you all the pieces and then show you the data. Whereas this one goes, I'm going to show you the data and get you to think about what you're seeing before you know what the data is. And I think that's a really powerful thing. They're doing it for schools, but I'm going to start doing it for audiences because it forces people to engage with data in a way I've not seen. So there you go. That was mine. Cool. Right. Well, Harry, Eilidh, it has been fantastic. Please let us know what you thought. If you've been reading some interesting things, let us know. If you've read the things we've just talked about, tell us what you thought about them. And with that, I'm going to say thank you to Harry and Eilidh. Take care. See you soon. And we'll see you next time with a slightly longer haircut. We're going to keep going. We'll see you next time on If Data Could Talk.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.